The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was alive with its usual pre-show energy. Crew members adjusted cameras, sound engineers did their final checks, and the audience settled in, completely unaware they were about to witness a standout moment in late-night television. Meghan Markle had arrived for what was expected to be a standard promotional appearance, part of her outreach for a new charitable initiative she was championing. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his sharp humor and skill in handling even the trickiest celebrity interviews, was well prepared. His research team had compiled typical talking points, light-hearted questions designed to entertain without crossing any lines, and backup topics to keep the conversation flowing if needed. But what no one foresaw was that Meghan would come with her own narrative, one that would challenge the usual tone of the show. As the show's familiar theme music faded and applause subsided, Jimmy greeted the camera with his signature smile. The crowd was lively and responsive, perfect for a successful broadcast. Meghan entered with the confidence and grace that had made her an international presence, waving to the audience before taking her seat opposite Jimmy. "Welcome back to the show," Jimmy said warmly. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and I've got to say, it's great to have you. How have you been?" "I'm doing great, Jimmy. Thank you for having me," Meghan replied with a friendly smile. To the audience, she seemed perfectly at ease. But Jimmy, seasoned in reading his guests, noticed a subtle sharpness in her tone. "I know you're here to talk about your new foundation, which sounds amazing, by the way," he continued, leaning in slightly with his familiar relaxed style. "But I've got to ask, how's life now that you're out from under all that royal protocol? I mean, now you can just say what's on your mind without running it by a whole team, right?" The question sounded harmless, exactly the sort of thing guests usually laugh off or use to tell a light story. But Meghan's expression changed just slightly. A flicker in her eyes hinted that Jimmy might have touched on something more sensitive than he intended. "Well, Jimmy," she said, her voice still pleasant but more measured, "I think there's a misunderstanding that I wasn't able to express myself before. I've always been someone who speaks up for what matters to me, no matter the environment or institution." Jimmy caught the slight shift in tone, but pushed on, hoping humor might soften the moment. "Right, of course. But you've got to admit, it's probably a bit more open now. I mean, back then, could you really have come on a show like this and just told us exactly what you thought?" "I'm curious, Jimmy," Meghan said, her smile shifting to something more deliberate. "What exactly do you think I should be telling you? What is it you expect me to say now that I supposedly couldn't say before?" The audience laughed, assuming it was light-hearted back and forth. But beneath the surface, the tension between host and guest was building. Jimmy began to realize that his usual interview approach might not work this time. "I'm not expecting anything in particular," Jimmy replied, trying to guide the conversation back on track. "I just think people are interested in your experience, what it was really like behind the scenes, you know, the kind of details that don't make it into the headlines." "Behind the scenes," Meghan repeated, her tone sharper now. "Do you mean how I was treated by the media, or how certain reporters seemed committed to spinning stories that had little to do with the truth? Is that what you're trying to get at?" Jimmy sensed the conversation veering into unfamiliar territory, but he knew better than to pull back too quickly. Sometimes, leaning into the moment worked better than deflecting. "Look, I think people want to hear your point of view," he said. "You've been under intense public scrutiny, more than most people ever face. How do you manage that?" "How do I handle scrutiny, Jimmy?" Meghan's voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was clear. "I face it by being honest, even when the truth isn't comfortable. I don't let institutions or individuals control the story about my life. I speak up, whether people like it or not." At this point, the audience was beginning to pick up on the shift. The atmosphere had changed. What started as a casual interview was evolving into something more serious, more unpredictable. Jimmy felt it too, and instinctively tried to bring things back to familiar ground. "That's completely fair, and I think that kind of honesty is powerful," he said, taking on a more measured tone. "But when you're in the public eye, you know people are going to have opinions. Some of those won't be kind. That just comes with the territory, doesn't it?" Meghan's expression tightened, and for a brief moment, Jimmy questioned whether he'd just crossed a line. "Part of the territory," she repeated. "Jimmy, are you saying the treatment I got? The racial undertones, The constant misrepresentation of who I am and what I say. That's something I should have just accepted as normal. The studio fell noticeably quieter. This was no longer a routine celebrity segment. It had taken a more serious turn, one the crew and audience hadn't expected. Jimmy was now facing a moment he hadn't prepared for. He chose his next words carefully. "That's not what I'm saying at all," he said. "Racism is absolutely unacceptable. If that's what you experienced, then that's deeply wrong. I guess I'm just wondering, how do you tell the difference between fair criticism and what clearly crosses the line?" Legitimate criticism. Meghan's tone rose slightly, and Jimmy could tell things had just taken a turn for the worse. "Tell me, Jimmy, what exactly do you believe I should be fairly criticized for? For marrying someone I love? For trying to bring positive change to an outdated institution? Or for speaking up about issues that matter to me?" Jimmy was now in unfamiliar territory. His usual mix of humor and light conversation wasn't going to work here. He glanced briefly at his producers off stage, but their uncertain expressions offered no help. "I'm not saying you deserve criticism for any of those things," Jimmy said, trying to regain control. "I think people sometimes find it hard to separate your public responsibilities from your private views. When you're part of something like the royal family, there are expectations about how certain disagreements are addressed, internally versus publicly." "Internally versus publicly," Meghan repeated, her tone making it clear he had stumbled again. "Jimmy, when those internal channels fail, when the system won't protect you or your family, worse, when it actively undermines you, what do you suggest someone should do? Stay quiet to maintain appearances?" The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely. Everyone, audience members, camera operators, producers, was aware that the conversation had moved into unexpected and difficult territory. Jimmy had interviewed countless public figures and managed tense moments, but this felt different, more direct, more sensitive. "I think," Jimmy said cautiously, "many people believe there are often multiple ways to address tough situations. Sometimes, working within the system, even when it's challenging, can be more effective than going public." Meghan gave a short, pointed laugh. "Working within the system, Jimmy? The same system that allowed false stories about me to be leaked to the press, while refusing to correct blatant inaccuracies? The system that questioned the identity of my children before they were even born? Please tell me, what part of that was I supposed to collaborate with?" The room had gone completely silent. This was no longer a casual late-night interview. It had become something else, more serious and deeply personal. Jimmy saw his producers signaling urgently from off-camera, but he couldn't tell if they wanted a commercial break, a topic shift, or something else entirely. "Look, Meghan," Jimmy said, now dropping his usual cheerful tone, "we're clearly getting into some heavy topics. It's not my intention to attack you or downplay what you've gone through. I was just trying to have an open conversation." "A conversation?" Meghan replied, disbelief in her voice. "Jimmy, I was invited here, supposedly to discuss my charitable work. Instead, the entire interview has focused on questioning my choices, suggesting I mishandled how I responded to serious mistreatment, and implying that I somehow brought all this attention on myself." Jimmy felt a flash of frustration. He'd tried to be respectful, to ask questions his audience might have, and yet every comment he made seemed to backfire. "That's not what I was trying to do. I wanted to understand your experience, but it feels like even asking questions about it is being viewed as offensive." "Asking questions isn't the problem, Jimmy," Meghan replied, her calm exterior now showing cracks. "It's the way the questions are framed, the assumptions behind them, the implication that I should have just accepted being mistreated for the sake of a bigger picture. That's what's offensive." The tension in the studio had become unmistakable. Jimmy noticed the audience shifting in their seats, uncertain if they should even be witnessing this exchange. His usual response would be to crack a light-hearted joke, to ease the mood. But something told him that would be a serious misstep in this moment. "I never said you should accept being mistreated," Jimmy replied, his voice rising slightly. "But there's a difference between standing up for yourself and discussing private family matters on a global platform. Some people might see that as going too far." "Some people might see that as going too far," Meghan repeated, and Jimmy instantly knew he'd stepped into trouble again. "Are you one of those people, Jimmy? Do you believe I went too far by sharing my story, especially when no one else was willing to tell it truthfully. He was stuck. If he agreed, it would sound like an outright criticism, bad for the show, and likely worse for any future rapport with her team, but if he disagreed, he'd contradict his own point and come off as inconsistent. I think, Jimmy said carefully, that everyone has the right to tell their own story. But I also believe that when you're part of a public family, how you choose to share that story can have consequences. Consequences, Meghan repeated, her voice now edged with something sharper. Are you implying consequences for speaking honestly about my life? Is that a warning? A quiet stir moved through the studio audience. Jimmy's eyes widened, realizing how his words may have come across. No, not at all. I didn't mean it as a threat. I just meant that actions usually lead to reactions. That's all. Actions lead to reactions, Meghan echoed. So when I was targeted with racially biased media coverage, when my mental health was deteriorating, when my family was under attack, you think I should have paused to consider how others might react to me defending myself, that I should have weighed my own safety and well-being against how uncomfortable the truth might make people. Jimmy felt cornered. Every response seemed to push him deeper into a situation he hadn't anticipated. The room was now completely silent, everyone watching intently, caught between concern and curiosity. That's not what I meant, Jimmy said quickly. I'm not saying you shouldn't have defended yourself. I just think maybe there were other ways to go about it. Something less, I don't know, less extreme. Extreme? Meghan's voice was nearly a whisper, but its tone was unmistakably serious. You think sharing personal experiences about racism and mental health challenges is extreme? You think a woman speaking openly about her struggles is somehow excessive? Jimmy could feel sweat forming along his brow. The studio lights, normally manageable, now felt stifling. I'm not saying it was excessive, he replied. I just believe that with family issues it can sometimes be more constructive to deal with them in private. Family issues, Meghan repeated. Her tone suggested that things had only gotten worse. Jimmy, this isn't about who forgot to call on a birthday. This is about institutional racism, mental health struggles, and concerns for my children's safety. Are you really suggesting those should have been handled quietly, behind closed doors? The audience began to stir again, and Jimmy could hear soft whispers and shifting seats. His producers were signaling from offstage. He couldn't tell if they were urging him to end the conversation, change direction, or keep pushing through. I think, Jimmy said with effort, that sometimes private discussions can lead to more progress than public ones. Private discussions, Meghan repeated with a short, humorless laugh. Jimmy, those private routes failed me entirely. They weren't just ineffective, they were part of the problem. When private systems refuse to support the very people they're supposed to protect, what exactly do you expect those people to do? Jimmy was running out of ways to steer the conversation. Every effort he made to clarify his point was met with even firmer resistance, and frustration was beginning to show. Look, I'm not denying your situation was painful. I'm not questioning the validity of your concerns, but surely you can see why some people might think discussing private family matters publicly isn't the best way to address them. Private family matters? Meghan's tone was flat, controlled. Is that what you think this is, Jimmy? That my experiences with racism were just personal issues I should have kept hidden? The silence in the studio was now overwhelming. Jimmy could hear the low hum of the ventilation system. When he glanced at the audience, he saw expressions ranging from discomfort to disapproval. Some were murmuring quietly, while a few appeared ready to leave. That's not what I meant, Jimmy said, though even he could tell his words lacked conviction. Then what did you mean? Meghan leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. Because from where I sit, it sounds like you believe I should have stayed quiet, kept my head down, just to avoid making anyone uncomfortable with the truth. Jimmy looked across the desk at her, feeling outmatched. The composed, poised guest who had entered the studio earlier had now shifted into someone far more direct and unwilling to back down. Meghan was focused, unapologetic, and clearly driven by a sense of personal justice. I think we need to take a moment, Jimmy said, trying to regain control. This conversation's gotten far more heated than I think either of us intended. Has it really, Jimmy? Meghan's voice was firm. Or is this the discussion you always meant to have? Did you bring me here expecting I'd nod politely while you picked apart every step I took to protect myself and my family?" Something inside Jimmy gave way. He had spent years balancing tough conversations, keeping the mood light, and ensuring guests felt comfortable. But now, faced with someone who seemed committed to interpreting every question as an attack, he felt his patience wearing thin. "You know what, Meghan?" he said, his tone sharper, his usual calm stripped away. "I invited you here because I thought we could have an honest exchange. But from the start you've turned every question into a personal accusation. I'm honestly tired of being made out to be some kind of villain just for asking the questions most people are thinking." There was a collective reaction from the audience, a noticeable gasp. For a host known for keeping his cool, this was a rare loss of composure. Meghan's expression didn't change much, but her eyes seemed to narrow with a sense of certainty, as if Jimmy had finally revealed what she expected all along. "Honest questions," she repeated, voice low but unwavering. "Tell me, Jimmy, what's honest about spending a whole interview questioning a person for speaking about their mistreatment? What's fair about implying I should have handled racism or mental health struggles differently?" "I never said you shouldn't speak out," Jimmy replied, now fully abandoning the diplomatic approach. "I questioned how you chose to go about it. There's a big difference between standing your ground and setting everything around you on fire while doing it." "Setting everything on fire?" Meghan's voice rose slightly, firm but not shouting. "Jimmy, what exactly do you think I destroyed? What damage do you believe was caused by me sharing the truth about my life?" "You ended any chance of reconnecting with your family," Jimmy said, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. "You've made it nearly impossible for anyone to maintain a relationship with you without having to choose sides. You've turned personal struggles into a public spectacle." The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed frozen as everyone processed what had just been said. Meghan looked at him steadily, and Jimmy noticed a shift in her expression that made his stomach sink. "Public spectacle," Meghan repeated slowly. "Is that how you see my pain, Jimmy? As entertainment?" Jimmy knew he had crossed a line, but frustration and anger clouded his judgment. "I think you've built a platform around your grievances, and frankly some people are growing tired of hearing how difficult your life has been, especially considering the opportunities you've had that most people never will." The audience erupted. Some gasped, others murmured in disbelief. A few stood up, clearly upset. Behind the scenes, producers moved quickly, unsure how to salvage what had become a spiraling situation. Meghan stood, calm and deliberate. "Let me make sure I understand this. You believe that because I've had privilege, I should have quietly endured racism. That marrying into a high-profile family meant giving up the right to speak about discrimination." Jimmy stood too, letting his emotions override his better judgment. "I believe that when someone has a platform and influence, they should use it responsibly to build, not to settle scores or damage reputations." "To damage reputations." Meghan's voice shook, not with fear, but with restrained anger. "I didn't damage anyone's reputation. I shared the truth about how I was treated. If that truth reflected poorly on others, then maybe they should consider their own behavior instead of blaming me for speaking out." "That's your version of the truth," Jimmy countered. "Your perspective, your interpretation. But there are always two sides to every story." Meghan's face went still. "Two sides?" she asked quietly. "What's the other side of racism, Jimmy? What's the other side of someone being pushed to the edge of mental collapse? Please, help me understand what that alternative viewpoint might be." Jimmy felt like he was losing control, but he pressed on. "Maybe the other side is that sometimes people are criticized for valid reasons, and not every criticism is about race. Invoking racism shouldn't be the default response to every difficult experience." The words landed heavily, casting a shadow over the room. The audience exploded, some shouted, others booed, and several began heading for the exits. Meghan looked at Jimmy, her expression hardened, not just with anger but deep disappointment. "Invoking racism," she said, her voice low but clear. "So that's it. Jimmy Kimmel just told a biracial woman that she was playing the race card for speaking about racism." Jimmy's face turned pale as the weight of his words hit him, but there was no undoing it. Everyone had heard. "That's not what I meant," he began, but Meghan cut him off. "It's exactly what you meant," she said, and now everyone knows where you really stand." Meghan stepped back from her chair, maintaining her composure despite the chaos in the room. "I came here to talk about meaningful work, about contributing positively to society. Instead, you've spent this entire conversation challenging my intentions, questioning my experiences, and ultimately suggesting that my encounters with racism aren't valid." "Meghan, please, let's try to de-escalate," and Jimmy started, but she interrupted firmly. "Don't tell me to calm down," Meghan said sharply. "You just dismissed every experience I've had with racism and now you expect me to stay quiet about it?" Behind the scenes, Jimmy's producers were signaling urgently for security, realizing that the situation had gone far beyond their control. The audience was clearly unsettled, some visibly supporting Meghan, others appearing to back Jimmy. The tension in the room had become palpable. "I think we should end this interview," Jimmy said, glancing toward the control room with growing unease. "Oh, we're ending it," Meghan responded clearly. "But not because you've decided it should end. We're stopping because I won't sit here and let someone speak so dismissively about issues they clearly don't understand." Security approached the stage, not due to any threat from Meghan, but to re-establish order in what had become an increasingly unstable environment. Seeing them approach, Meghan raised her hand calmly. "I don't need an escort," she said, projecting her voice clearly. "I can leave on my own." She turned to Jimmy one last time. "I hope at some point you reflect on what you revealed about yourself tonight. I hope you ask yourself why you felt the need to challenge someone for simply speaking honestly about their lived experiences." "Meghan, I wasn't attacking you," Jimmy said, though his voice barely rose above the noise in the studio. "Yes, you were," Meghan replied evenly, "and everyone here saw it." She walked off the stage without looking back, head held high, leaving behind a divided audience, a host in shock, and a production team scrambling to regain control. Security followed at a respectful distance, ensuring she reached her car without issue. The cameras never stopped rolling. What began as a standard promotional appearance had ended in a moment that would be replayed, debated, and dissected for days to come. A late-night segment that inadvertently laid bare complex, unresolved tensions around race, privilege, and public accountability.